Can't touch a shooter while he's in the process of shooting the ball. It's against the rules. Shooter goes to the foul line, takes 2 free throws. But what happens if the shooter brandishes a knife, he's dribbling the ball, and he suddenly takes out a switchblade? You're allowed to grab his arm now because we're not playing basketball anymore.
Thanks for the setup, General. Hello, everyone, and welcome. As the title suggests, in today's video, we are talking about the new multi-class system in Dark and Darker, released on Friday, April 12th, exclusively on the test server. I spent my waking hours over this past weekend playing on the test server, tinkering with this new system, like the fate of our species depended on it. What follows is my experience with it, my analysis of its impact on the game that we all love, and this ultimate conclusion: that multiclassing as implemented is fun, it is broken, it is unbalanced, and it is ultimately unbalanceable. In the foreground here, you are watching 3 back-to-back games on my test, quote, Warlock, end quote, Anithrax. Annie is a level 150 character who is a mashup of mostly Warlock and Cleric, but also with a dash of Fighter thrown in. This is broken, but this discussion is not really about this build or spec. I'm sure there are countless perk and talent synergies which are far more broken than this one. This is my first attempt at putting together a concept. I was extremely unlucky with my RNG of my draws with teaching tokens. But here, if you're interested, is a quick splash of the talents that I ran for these 3 matches, if you're interested. Let's get a few things out of the way before we begin discussion in earnest. I'd like to take a moment to compliment the Iron Mace team for the work and the maturity on display here. The decision to release the multi-class system, this foundational change and fundamental expansion of character power, to the test server first and not to the general servers, was absolutely the right decision. From a technical perspective, this build is in a great place. It's hard to believe how far we've come since January. The team is working in multiple branches. The test servers held up very well under what I imagine is the largest load we've placed on them yet. I experienced 0 performance and 0 technical issues in my 35 plus hours of testing. As to my experience on the test server, it was fun-ish. It was fun because Dark and Darker is a fun game. Don't get me wrong, it was also a grind. Because of the lower population on the test server and the addition of the new gear-based matchmaking system, I rarely saw anything approaching a full lobby. 95% plus of the game lobbies took the full 3 minutes to load into the game. Most matches played out the same. Lots of PvE, lots of killing mobs and quest completion, followed by a hasty extraction. All energy focused on extraction because we're focused on getting levels, and the only way to make real XP gains is to extract. All said and done, I leveled my Warlock to level 150, my Cleric to level 40, my Fighter to level 30, my Ranger to 60, and my Rogue to level 30. Don't get me wrong, if you were to log in and immediately have access to a full roster of level 150 characters, it would be fun to play with multiclassing, at least for a while. It's fun to break things, and believe me, this system completely breaks the current game. It's novel, or it would be, at least for a while, until you look around and survey the ruins of the game that this system has rendered. If you don't have the test client installed, I don't recommend you install it for this. In its current state, it is far too great of a time commitment to make the climb to assemble a build that you may or may not be able to finally assemble completely due to the RNG in the system. And even if you were able to assemble the build that you envision, it might be very hard to find anyone to test your build against. But what are classes in Dark and Darker? Obviously, it's an archetype, lifted from your typical fantasy trope. In game system terms, a class is a set of baseline stats, a restricted and curated selection of weapons and armor available to that class, and a selection of perks, spells, and skills. So what then is multiclassing in Dark and Darker? Multiclassing is a progression system where you invest vast amounts of time for a chance to teach, aka copy, a skill, spell, or perk that you'd like to have from one level character of a given class to another. If I had to guess, I would wager that the design intent of this system is to promote new and interesting build diversity at the end game. That's a laudable goal. But what it achieves in the broadest sense is a complete dismantling of that underlying class system, a large shift in the game's core gameplay loop, and an introduction of a truly epic, no, legendary grind for anyone who wants to be at all competitive in the game's PvP. You see, each class today has a selection of perks, skills, and weapons, which are generally considered good, or meta. Others are niche or situational, while others are lesser, or in the common parlance, trash tier. Each class is balanced in relation to each other, more or less, on its best or most meta assembly of these constituent parts. With the introduction of multiclassing, this approach is no longer valid, and balance becomes considerably more complex. With the ability to eventually assemble a collection of perks and skills from multiple classes, we are no longer having, nor are we capable of having, a discussion of class balance. We must now increase our granularity to examine each skill, weapon, perk, and spell, first in isolation, and then against the complete universe of all skills, perks, and spells available to all classes. The end result is quite predictable. The long-term and steady erosion of any class differentiation, identity, or role. And the inevitable nerfing of Class A because its skill, spell, or perk is just too good on Class B. Think about that for a second. Let's set aside the complexity of balance for a moment and accept as a given that balance in an effectively classless system is going to be more complex. The purpose for having balance in the first place is to establish a baseline of fairness to govern character interactions. Let's set aside fairness for a moment and discuss the impact of the multiclassing system on the core gameplay loop. Every match of Dark and Darker follows a kind of set formula. I'm going to refer to that formula as the core gameplay loop. We all start in our stash tab. We're looking at our gear, doing what one of friends of mine refers to as dressing up our dollies. We assemble our gear to give ourselves the best advantage we can, either playing to our character's strengths or shoring up the weaknesses. We do this while weighing the value of that gear that we are about to effectively wager by taking it into our next game. We clear some PvE, we loot some stuff, and we either look for or try to avoid trouble. Trouble in the form of other players. We see them before they see us. We immediately identify and size up our adversary and render a choice. We ask ourselves, are we strong? Are they weak? Do we push? Do we fall back? All of these questions are answered today through hard-earned in-game knowledge, limit testing, and player skill. This is a classic ODA loop. ODA for short stands for observe, decide, and act. Right? We go through this process every fight. We observe, we decide, and we act based on the calculations and those questions that I just framed. This is where multiclassing fundamentally breaks Dark and Darker's core gameplay loop. Without visual distinction of how your adversary is built, without knowing your adversary's capabilities, we can't make good decisions nor preparations for an upcoming fight. This change is going to take a great deal of the thought process out of Dark and Darker. It's going to make many fights feel just like a coin flip. Defeats are going to feel cheap in ways that they don't feel today, and preparation, effective preparation, is going to become all but impossible. In a very real way, a successful fight is equal to this formula. Victory is equal to good decisions plus preparation plus Delta gear plus Delta skill plus opportunity. Multiclassing essentially obviates 2 out of these 5 elements which make up a good fight. Reflect on this. In my experience of the last 40 hours, the most common perk I've seen multi-classed has been Fighter's Weapon Master, which then begs the question, is that a bard? Is he wielding a Zweihander? Or is that a barbarian with a flute? Who knows? Let's flip a coin. But let's set that aside for a minute and talk about how multiclassing changes the minimum commitment to be a competitive player in Dark and Darker. This game system is the single largest character power increase in the history of the game, full stop. The ability to effectively double down on your build's strengths or shore up its weaknesses is inherently strong, but not nearly as strong as empowering effectively unrestricted weapon choice. Damage stacking is in no way governed by swing speed. Faster weapons are inherently better at the upper ends. Hybrid damage, combining magic and physical damage, is simply better, as it's much more expensive to be tanky versus both. All of this is to say, think it through. Multiclassing is so powerful, it is not, by definition, a supplemental system or a nice-to-have. It's a must-have if you'd like to be competitive. Now, up to this point in time, skill and gear have been the 2 key factors in attaining success as a competitive PvP player in Dark and Darker. Skill and gear. With multiclassing, we're introducing a 3rd element. And the 3rd one is a big one. This 3rd factor is governed by your total playtime and is gatekept by a gacha-esque RNG system. A little bit more on that. You see, you can grind to level 150 and still never get the skills, spells, or perks you set out to achieve for your final build. The sweatiest of the sweatlords, though, will not be deterred. Should they fail to pull and draw the perks that they're looking for, they will re-roll that character and do it all again. The end result is that Iron Mace is raising the minimum stakes and the time commitment required to be a competitive player in their game to an astronomical, a laughable level. Everyone is going to resent this implementation. Those who cannot afford to invest the time to be competitive will shrug, likely give up, resenting this game system for destroying any sense of fairness in what was once thought to be a fairly fair competition. The sweatlords will resent the ridiculous grind to remain relevant at the end game. The end result will be people being forced to play a game more than they would like to stay competitive. At the end of the day, that's only going to be an option for those who can afford to play this game as a job. Lastly, eagle-eyed viewers out there may have noticed that I'm playing these 3 games here in a normal lobby. A couple reasons for that, the most important of which is this is the only place you can reliably find folks to fight right now on the test server. But I'm also doing this to prove a point. You see, this is such a titanic increase to character power. Imagine if these lobbies were all filled with new players going into the Goblin Caves for the first time. What good is a gear-based matchmaking system when gear is the least significant of the 3 criteria for a fair fight? I can take an optimized level 150 character into games in white gear, and my advantage is near insurmountable. Iron Mace, do you intend to introduce level-based matchmaking in addition to gear-based matchmaking to counteract this vector of exploitation? That's a rhetorical question. I don't think we can matchmake for both. Guys, if you're still watching this, thank you. This clearly took me over 40 hours to assemble, write, produce, edit, etc. So kindly like and subscribe if you have not already. It helps me a ton. Iron Mace, if you're listening, I applaud the creativity here, but this game system is fundamentally flawed. If you're still thinking about patching this system into the live game, I beg you, I implore you, please wait for the slow period at the end of Early Access Season 2, ahead of the next wipe. It might serve to bring some people back who had taken a break, but regardless, it will not corrupt or otherwise jeopardize the current ladder. Should this go live, it will irreparably damage the ladder for this season, if not driving off a significant portion of the current player base. As always, I'm looking forward to a lively discussion in the comments section. What do you guys think of this? Until next time, Koopa out.
Missed free throws, that's what kills you.
2.